don't know how or why they put me in Strathmore, but I just found myself in Strathmore. It just took me by surprise. I never imagined how cool it would be. All I could see was just plain green grass, and everyone was just so bland, and cows on the farm. Is this Canada? Back at university, I did pretty much anything. My first job was working at Subway. I worked at Subway. During the summer, I would work at McDonald's or DQ. It's been a journey so far.
Welcome to My Berta Beginning, a podcast about people from all over the world who have chosen to make the province of Alberta their home. My name is Mystique Mahoza, and in each episode, I'll be guiding you through the story of a different immigrant to Alberta. We'll find out where they came from, what brought them here, and learn a little bit more about the province from people seeing it for the first time. Today, we're speaking to David, a 22-year-old from Africa's most populated country, Nigeria, who moved to Alberta as an international student. David was born and raised in the West African country's commercial hub, Lagos. But he spent most of high school at a boarding school a couple hours away. His life was strictly controlled, with almost every part of every day outlined for him from waking up till going to sleep. The best comparison he could find for what it felt like was a combination of prison and being in the military. Once he graduated high school, he felt adrift without that structure there to guide him.
After high school, I was like, I don't know what to do. After leaving the whole school, I was just kind of lost.
In the past decade, Nigeria's influence in the global cultural exchange has grown, especially through its musical experts, with artists like Burna Boy, Wizkid, and Tiwa Savage becoming worldwide names. But years of widespread corruption and poor economic policies mean the country itself has not matched that ascent. 53% of its 200 million population lives in multi-dimensional poverty. And as of the end of 2020, 55% of its labor force was or underemployed. This has led to a massive brain drain. Many of the country's young professionals and middle class are packing their bags and looking for greener pasture abroad. Increasingly, though, young people are not even becoming professionals before leaving the country. They're doing their post-secondary education abroad in order to avoid Nigeria's faltering education system and get a head start on life in a country with more opportunities. Even though sending him abroad would be expensive, David's father felt like this was the way to go for his son.
I honestly didn't even know I would be here. My dad had his plans in mind that when my son is done school, okay, I would want to further his education kind of thing. I feel like my dad didn't have the education he wanted to have, so he wants his kids to have the education he needs. So him was more of getting the best education for his kids.
I mean, think about it. He could study for a few years, graduate, and then have a chance at applying for permanent residence. It felt like a no-brainer.
The main intention to immigrate to Canada was to study, and which I'm still doing right now. My dad had other intentions, so study, get your papers, and just set a bright future for yourself kind of thing.
The process of applying to school in Canada as an international student can be complicated. Coming from outside the country adds extra steps to post-secondary admission process that can already be pretty stressful. Although it's different depending on where you're coming from, it can include language proficiency tests, documentation, translation, sending transcripts internationally. And that's just to get accepted into the school. After that, you still have to apply for a study permit to legally allow you to go to school in Canada. Any mistakes along the line would cost time and money. So David's dad hired an immigration consultant to make sure everything went smoothly. Students graduate high school earlier in Nigeria, so David was only 16 at the time. Because of his age, the consultant decided it would be best if he went back to high school first. They placed him at school in a place called Strathmore, where he would finish grade 12 before heading to university.
I don't know how or why they put me in Strathmore, but I just found myself in Strathmore.
Even though most of the decision and planning were out of his hand, and this was going to be his first time ever leaving the country, David was looking forward to moving when the time came.
From someone who had no intentions of leaving Nigeria, I was pretty excited.
Looking back, after 6 years away from home in boarding school, being far away from his family didn't seem like that big of a deal.
My boarding school was like a completely different state from where I lived in Nigeria, right? So I feel like doing that from like a very early age, right, prepared me to, I would say, live in a different continent from actually my hometown.
Before leaving, he prepared himself for the weather.
I know it's a cold country, was the first thing that crossed my mind. So I thought, okay, I would get maybe a couple hoodies that I would wear.
But as soon as he stepped out of Calgary International Airport, he quickly figured out hoodie wasn't quite enough preparation.
I remember landing in the airport and coming out of the airport doors, and it was very cold. I had to like get the parka jacket. The reality to what I expected was just extreme. It just took me by surprise. I never like imagined how cold it would be.
The surprises didn't end there. On the drive to Strathmore, a town 50 kilometers east of Calgary, he met a very different picture of what he had expected.
I remember when I landed from the airport, I was thinking, oh, Canada would be this very beautiful place. It's beautiful, don't get me wrong, but I landed, then I was to drive up to Strathmore, and all I could see was just plain green grass, and everyone was just so bland, and cows on the farm. Is this Canada? And I would wake up in the morning to the smell of manure and hearing cows. So my whole thought process was Strathmore is Canada, but there was actually Canada outside of Strathmore.
He was placed in a homestay with a family in town. They were nice, and he definitely felt well taken care of. But living outside of Nigeria for the first time in his life in a Canadian home took some getting used to, especially when it came to the food. Nigerian cuisine is abundant in flavor and rich in color. Nigerians tend to cook with a variety of spices, vegetables, and assorted meats to create a deeply flavorful dish like jollof rice, a popular dish with rice prepared in a tomato and pepper paste, and soups and stews like egusi, eforiro, and ogbono, consisting of spices, vegetables, assorted meats, palm oil, and most important, a deeply flavored broth.
I started eating like muffins and cereals for breakfast, and all this kind of like, shepherd's pie, what do they call it? Yeah, shepherd's pie and mashed potatoes. I just had to like get used to like eating those kind of food.
He was also struck by just how much everyone seemed to love hockey, a sport that seemed planets away from Nigeria's national sport, soccer.
Your love for hockey was the first thing that actually stood out to me, because I felt like hockey was a game I never heard of. Like moving from a country where there is no snow, there is not even ice on the road, right? To like a country where they play sports on ice was just like a whole completely different thing. So yeah.
Once school started, it wasn't supposed to be this hard. I mean, he had already graduated once. But adjusting to a completely new system was difficult. It seemed like a lot more theoretical, less straightforward than he was used to back home.
Having to like adjust to the education system here, because I remember in high school where I'll just leave class and just go break down in the bathroom, because I felt like I actually can't do this. I just felt like I was wasting my parents' money just doing something like I couldn't do.
Outside of class, he had a hard time making friends.
Yeah, it took some getting used to. For me, it took about, I would say, a year and a half to just making friends.
But like many other kids his age, he was able to build connections through sport. And no, he didn't suddenly pick up skates and magically turn into Connor McDavid. It was a sport he was much more familiar with, soccer.
To make friends, I had to join the school soccer team for my high school. So soccer was one of the main, I would say, sport I used in high school when I got here in Canada to just like get to know more people.
He joined his high school team and was able to connect with his teammates and learn more about what life was like here. Eventually, things started to pick up. He finished the school year strong and applied to a few universities across the province, finally choosing to study biology at the University of Lethbridge. Just like many Canadian kids, less parental support and a lot more financial responsibilities meant post-secondary would challenge him in and out of the classroom.
Going into university, it was a whole different ball game. My first semester, was when I realized, oh, okay, if I'll be paying rent and paying for my phone bill and paying for this and that, I actually have to get a side job kind of thing, right?
But his status as an international student made it even more complicated.
Taking like full-time classes with trying to balance it with work after school, or like work 5 hours or 6 hours after school, then like going home to like rinse and repeat the same cycle. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Then during the weekend, one has to like study or pick up extra shift kind of thing. So it was just pretty much a cycle, kind of like my high school days, but like back in Nigeria, not really having much social life to really like do what you want to do. I don't know, to me it was just like having like four full-time jobs. So having to like come up with not just the tuition fee, but the international student tuition fee.
International students across Canada pay tuition fees that are 2 or 3 times those of citizens or permanent residents. If a Canadian student pays $1,000, an international student might pay $3,000. This practice has been described as predatory and exploitive. Differential tuition fees were not always the norm, though. According to the Canadian Federation of Students, the idea was first introduced in 1976 to allow provinces to generate more revenue. As post-secondary funding has decreased, international students have become highly sought after to drive up schools' revenues. Some people make the argument that differential tuition exists because these students don't contribute taxes, but they pay tax just like everyone else on any money they make while working. Speaking of work, international students are also only allowed to work 20 hours off campus per week while school is in session. They can work as much as they want on campus, but those jobs usually pay around minimum wage, which reduces their earning potential and limits the kind of opportunities they can get. They also don't have access to the same loans and bursaries as their Canadian colleagues. So for David, coming from a country like Nigeria, which lacks a robust student loan system, the burden rested squarely on his young shoulders.
My parents were still sponsoring me. If I can't make up for everything, they would help me. But whenever I get paid, first thing that comes in mind is, okay, I have to pay my school fees before I think of rent, before I think of my food or my phone bills kind of thing. And so I feel like my school fees took a huge chunk of my bread.
He worked whatever job he could.
Back at university, I did pretty much anything, because I remember my first job was working at Subway. I worked at Subway. During the summer, I would work at McDonald's or DQ. During the summer, I also worked at school cleaning. They had a thing where they would clean the dorms and I also applied for that, like worked at the school testing center, the test center. Yeah, I did that for a bit. So just anything to like keep my head afloat.
During the summer and other school breaks, international students can work as many hours as they want. For David, this meant taking on even more hours while catching up on classes he couldn't take because of his packed schedule.
So some of my summers even comprised of even taking extra summer classes, right? Because during school, where I'm taking 4 classes and 2 or 3 labs, right? So that itself is like taking six classes. That's more than a full-time load, right?
Just like in high school, he started to get the hang of things. He found a good balance and was connected with other Nigerian students, a lot of whom were in similar situations to him.
Eventually, I realized like things weren't like as hard as I saw them to be, because I felt like I like blended more. I could like talk to people. School was going very well. I eventually found the like fine balance between having to work and like having to go to school and having to make friends, and just like finding even like the little time for myself still. Eventually I found the balance. So those are like, I would say, the top moments, and yeah, things pretty much just got better from there.
In the last couple of years, the Alberta government under Jason Kenney has made significant cuts to the province's post-secondary education budget. As I mentioned earlier, universities and colleges have looked to international students as a way to increase revenue, and the University of Lethbridge has followed that province-wide trend. Tuition was already steadily on the rise, but these cuts have accelerated the process. In the 2014-2015 school year, a semester's tuition on a full course load of 5 classes at the University of Lethbridge for an international student cost just over $5,600. In 2021, the same thing is almost double that, at around $9,600. Remember, this is just tuition, not including other fees or the cost of textbooks and materials. David was caught in the middle of this, spending $20,000 a year just on school. Eventually, he had to make the decision to reduce his biggest expenditure by moving schools.
I transferred from the University of Lethbridge to Radio College, right? Because I was taking biology at the University of Lethbridge, but it was pretty expensive. So I thought, okay, my best bet or best option as an international student would be to reduce school fees for sure. And so I ended up transferring to Radio College to finish up my program.
The move was tough. David had to leave the community of young people that had become family away from home.
I didn't really have a social life in Radio compared to Lethbridge. It was a difficult decision for sure, but I just felt like I had to do it. I didn't want to, but I had to just to keep going, kind of thing.
It's taken longer than anticipated, but after years of school, David is approaching his final semester and is looking forward to the next chapter of his life in Canada. When he graduates, David will apply for a postgraduate work permit, which will allow him to work while he applies for his permanent residency. The country is usually keen on keeping international students as they're educated, have work experience, and are familiar with the country, but there are no guarantees. It's going to be a long process to get there, but it's a good thing David's already used to that.
The process, like the whole going to school, went smooth. Well, I just feel like the process of from being an international student to having to apply and work for postgraduate work permit and apply for PRs was a pretty long process, I would say. I feel like it's been close to 7 years now, I would say, since I first landed in Canada, and having to finish and by the end of this year it's pretty exciting. It's been a journey so far.
Thank you for listening to My Berta Beginning. The podcast was made possible thanks to funding from TELUS STORYHIve. My name is Mystique Mahoza, and this episode was produced and edited by Osaramen Irete, researched by Baria Ipa. The podcast was also made with the support of the National Screen Institute and our mentor, Kim Ann Johnson. Follow the team on Instagram at We're Here Too for more updates on the podcast and information on other projects. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe and share. And that's at We're Here Too with underscores separating each word. See you next episode.